Welcome to the tutorial for the Polegate skirt. I'm going to start by doing some pocket prep. So these are the two pattern pieces that you need for your pocket. This one goes on top of here, so we're going to just put that one to the side for the moment. Note that right side up is printed on all the pattern pieces. So I'm going to fold it over, and then I'm going to fold this centimetre over as well and give it a press so you can see it all fits nicely. There's my centimetre, and then I've folded it on that fold line that's on your pattern. I'm just going to stitch on the edge here, but you could do some fancy top stitching, or you could even use a contrast fabric for this pocket if you wanted it to be a bit more of a feature. Now we need this piece back, and I'm going to lay this on top like that, and I'm going to match my raw edges around the pocket like so, and pin it all the way around so that it fits perfectly. There we go, and we pull this bit in here so that that matches too. So that means you've got a little bit of ease there, so you can actually use the pocket, which is a good thing. And I'm just going to stitch around the edge now on a big stitch. I'm about 5mm from the edge, just so that it won't show when I'm stitching the rest of the skirt together. It just holds the pieces together so they don't move around. There we go. Make sure those edges are lined up. There we go, one pocket prepped and ready. There you can see the bit that I've sewn. Okay, so we're going to sew the lower right front to the upper right front. So this is my lower right hand side. Remember, all pieces need to be cut right side up. And this piece was my upper right side. So you can see there that they go together. Let's unpin the piece. That's a notch you need to match it to the top, and there's various other notches around. This pattern has quite a few notches because it's all asymmetric, just so that you don't try and attach the wrong piece. Okay, let's take that away. So it's this slightly curved edge at the top that I want to stitch. So I'm going to match this notch first. And then I'm going to match the edges, remembering that there's a centimetre seam allowance, so it will overlap a little bit at each end. There we go. I'm going to stitch across now using my centimetre seam allowance, and I'm using my regular size stitch. As we go, match those raw edges, try and keep it as accurate as possible. It'll be a much nicer finish if you do. There we go, that's attached nicely. Check there's no puckers in it. That's what it should look like. I'm going to finish this raw edge. I'm using my overlocker, but you could zigzag or bind or something if you wanted to. I'm going to press it downwards, down towards the sort of frilly bit. There we go. Job done. So next we're going to do the dart, which is on the other side of the front. There we go. So on the left side front, there's a dart, which makes it really nice to get a really good fit. There you go. You can see I've marked my notches with little snips. Again, you could use a ruler and chalk and draw the dart on if you wish. Remember, again, lots of notches. Do mark them. It does help. Incidentally, the difficulty level on this skirt is only set above beginner because of the sheer amount of pieces, really, and the fact you have to make sure they're all the right side up, and that there's a concealed zip. So don't be put off, but just beware that perhaps you need to have a little bit of a think about things, and be methodical with your cutting out and laying out and things. Otherwise, it's a very simple sew, really. Okay, so I've matched those notches at the top. I'm now pinning the end of the dart there. Let's just match those. There we go. Match those up in a nicer way so it's a bit more flat. And I'm going to start from the large end, obviously, and taper off down until I come off at that pin there. Back tack to start and taper off nicely to a point. There we go, that's it stitched. Let's open it up. And I'm going to press the fabric behind towards the side seam. There we go, one very smooth dart. So next we're going to join the front panels together. So we've got this one with the pocket in it, and we've got the other front that we've just put the dart in. And again, you'll see there's a little notch there that matches the seam line there. So start with that notch, and then I'm just going to pin down from the waist towards the hem. There we go, matching my raw edges as I go, and any notches I come across. There's one there. There we go. So I'm going to start from the waist, working down, back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance, all the way to the hem. This is quite a slim fitting skirt, so my personal preference would be some denim, maybe an 8 or 10 ounce with a little bit of stretch in it, but you could just as easily make it up in a really nice linen. Here we go. There's that seam. We're going to finish off that raw edge. There we go. I've just whizzed it through the overlocker again. And I'm going to press this seam allowance towards the other side. There we go. You can see, nice seam. That's a nice crisp junction there, all the way to the hem. Lovely. So now we're going to stitch the upper backs together. We're going to do this all in one because I think it actually saves for confusion. So definitely worth keeping your pattern pieces on for this bit. You can see they're clearly labelled. That one will be labelled the correct way up on your pattern, but you've got double notches here which denote the back seams, and you've got this notch here that's really important. Don't forget that one. So I've laid mine out like this, as this is the way it needs to go together. Again, all right side up. So I'm just going to flip that over onto the centre back panel and give that a little pin, matching the top first and working my way down to the notches and to the angled seam at the bottom. That's one side, and then flip this side over. Matching the top again, working from the waist down. Okay, stitching from the top, back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance. There we go, that's your upper back panels stitched together. I'm going to overlock and give those a press. There we go. So all overlocked and neatened. I'm going to press those seams out towards the side seams. There we go. I love this seaming. It makes it very easy to fit nicely over your bottom. So now we're going to stitch together the flounce for the lower skirt at the back. Again, right side ups, and you've got a double notch here for this seam, which is just very simple straight one. Again, your instructions will be written the other way up on your piece. So we're going to take the pins out. You'll see there's a notch here and a notch here that are important for attaching your flounce to your upper back skirt. Here we go. So we're just going to sort of line those up with the notches and then flip it over and pin. There we go. So from the top to the hem, centimetre seam allowance. There we go. Nice and smooth at the top. I'm going to overlock that seam allowance. Great, and I'm just going to press that to one side and give it a nice press. There we go. Job done. That's all ready to go onto the back. So now we're going to join those backs. So I've got my upper back there with its lovely diagonal line. There's a notch. That one matches that seam down the middle of your flounce. So let's start by pinning that one. Okay, so you want to align those raw edges again as best you can. Pop a pin in there. Then there's another notch here, look, on your flounce, which matches that other seam. And then you can pin the ends together, remembering again you've got that little bit that extends beyond the flounce so that you get your centimetre seam allowance. And there's another notch here that matches that seam. And again, you've got your little pointy bit that will extend beyond just a tiny bit. There we go. Oh, didn't pin that very well, did I? There we go. That's better. Oop, flicking my pins around. So as many or as few pins as you want, obviously. And then as you're sewing, just carefully matching the edges. So starting at one end, back tack, stitch, centimetre seam allowance again, all the way to the end, keeping those raw edges as close together as possible so that we get a perfect fit. There we go. So that edge just needs neatening now. Going to give it an overlock, and then I'm going to press the seam down towards the flounce. There we go. That's your back done. It's looking very neat on the inside. So now we're going to pop the zip in. Here's my zip. And I'm just going to prep it a little bit by opening up that coil and giving it a little press. Just helps to get the stitching in closer, I think, anyway. And that you can see it's been done because it sort of goes a bit wibbly wobbly once you've done it. Okay, so let's lay our skirt fronts and backs right sides together. You're not putting it in the pocket side, you're putting it in the other side. So I'm putting the right side of the zip down, so that's the side with the puller on it, and I'm just going to pin the tape so that the edge is resting against the overlocking. I find it's easier to pre-overlock. So I'm going to stitch on the edge of the tape. So I'm stitching through the edge of the tape and sort of where the overlocking is. Just going down as far as I can to the end of the zip. You might not get past the pull, but that's fine, just so that most of the zip is secured to the skirt already. And that acts as a kind of stay stitch, really. Now moving my needle across, and I'm going to get in as close as I can to that coil Might need to move my needle a little bit more. There we go. And I'm pulling the coil open. And because I've already stitched down one side of the tape, I've got a bit more purchase on it and I can pull it a bit without it moving. So I find it's better than pinning. There you go. I can go further down the tape this time. So there you go. I've got my 2 stitch lines. There's one there and then there's one right in the coil there, as close as I could get. Let's do the zip up again. I'm going to put the skirts back together again, right sides, and I'm going to pin the other side of the zip tape to the other side of the skirt. There we go. So I'll start at the waist and match up the edges again. And then I'll do basically exactly the same thing as I've done on the other side. I'll put that initial stay stitch on the edge of the tape, stitching it to the overlooking side, and then I'll go back in and get as close to the coil as I can. Okay, so it should look like this now. Look, you can see it's joined just by the zip. Let's do the zip up and check it's okay. Yep, that's pretty good. You can always go back in and get closer if you don't feel you're close enough. And the next stage is to fold these together again, pushing the zip stopper out of the way, and you're going to start stitching where you stopped stitching before at the bottom of the zip, and just stitch all the way to the hem. So you're stitching up the rest of the seam now. Okay, there we go. You can see I started where I'd stopped the stitching previously. I'm going to open up this seam and give it a press. And let's have a look. That doesn't look too bad to me. That's one zip in. So a nice easy job now. It's the other side seam. So front and back skirts right side together. This is the pocket side. We've got a seam to match here. So let's pin that first. Pop some more pins in. And I'm going to stitch from the waistline, back tack down, centimetre seam allowance again to the hem. There we go, that's done. So open up that seam and give it a press. There we go, that looks nice. Let's see how well we've matched that seam on the side. Open it up. Oh yeah, that's great. Happy with that. Okay, so let's prep this facing. So I've got a back facing and a front facing, which I have block cut. So let's open these out. I've also I've interfaced them. So make sure that you are leaving the correct side open, this side for me. Do pin it to your skirt if you're not sure, because you only need to stitch up one side. And then open it up and give it a press. And then I'm going to overlock around the edge of my facing. There we go. So that's all prepped and ready. So now we just need to attach the facing, which again, you will have checked you've got the right side, because the curves are different on the waistline. So do make sure you've got the right side stitched. And I'm going to start by pinning those seams together and then work my way across towards the zip. Folding back my centimetre seam allowance here and folding back that zip tape, putting them together and pinning through that. And then doing the same on the back. Fold that centimetre seam allowance back, folding the zip tape back and pinning those together. Pop a few extra pins in. There we go. So centimetre seam allowance again, back tack, stitch from one end to the other through all those layers, matching your raw edges as you go. There we are, all stitched on. So next I'm just going to clip away some of these bulky bits at the top. Keep the waistline looking smoother. Oh, I've caught that one. I'll just snip into that and then pull it over. There we go. Problem solved. So once you've removed the bulky bits, I'm just going to snip in every 3 or 4 centimetres. It's a curve. It's not a very steep curve, so it only needs a little bit of snipping. And then I'm going to grade this seam down, so I'm trimming away half the seam allowance from my facing. That's the interfaced side that you can see. So trim it all the way around. And once you've trimmed it around, you want to fold your seam allowance onto your facing. Give it a press, might help as well. And then I'm going to stitch right on the edge there so that all the seam allowance is attached to the facing. There we go. Just stitching a millimetre or two away from that fold. There we go. And then that just folds in really nicely and gives a lovely crisp edge. So I'm going to give that a quick press. There we go. And then I'm going to stitch in the ditch. I'm going to stitch into those seams through all the layers so that the facing is attached to the skirt, so it won't sort of ruckle up and roll. So I'm doing it just at the end there, back tack through each of those seams one by one. So there you go. You can't see it on the right side, but you can see it on the wrong side. You can see I've done it. And that will just hold it down nicely. Then I'm just going to tuck the seam allowance in on the ends, and I'm going to do a little hand stitch. There we go. 2 seconds to do that hand stitch. That's all secured. And then we'll just check the zip does up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, beautiful. Lovely. So all that's left to do now is the hem. I'm going to do a really simple hem, so I've overlocked already, and I'm just going to turn it up and stitch it. But you could do something really nice. Obviously choose how deep you want your hem based on how long you want your skirt. But you could use a bit of binding and put that on. You could do a really nice deep binding hem with some Liberty fabric or something like that that would maybe show when you walk. But as I said, I'm going to do the quick, easy option, which is stitching, pressing, and just turned it up a centimetre. See, that looks very smart, doesn't it? Looks really nice around the curves. So there we have it. One Polegate skirt, and I hope very much that yours looks exactly like this one. Enjoy.